What turns a mother into a monster or a caregiver into a serial killer? Behind several prison walls, a handful of Black women have left behind stories so chilling they still echo through the halls. From cutting a pregnant woman open to deadly betrayals, their actions rendered communities speechless. Who were they before the headlines? And what drove them to the edge? In this video, we uncover the most feared Black women in prison history. Jacqueline Annette Williams, State, Illinois. Date of execution, unspecified. In the months preceding her crime, Jacqueline Williams informed friends and family that she was pregnant. She hosted a baby shower, prepared a nursery, and produced a forged birth certificate. In reality, she was not pregnant. According to court records, Williams, along with her boyfriend Fidel Caffey and her cousin Laverne Ward, who was the biological father of two of the victim's children, developed a plan targeting Deborah Evans. She was a mother of 3 and was nearing the end of her 4th pregnancy. On November 16, 1995, the group entered Evans' apartment. Evans was killed and her unborn child was removed from her body. Williams took the newborn and left the scene with a friend, Kathy Cushbig. Evans' 10-year-old daughter, Samantha, who was present during the incident, was also killed. 2-year-old Jordan Evans was found unharmed at the scene, but left alone in the apartment. Several hours later, the body of 7-year-old Joshua Evans was found in an alley in Maywood. Investigators determined he had been taken from the apartment, held overnight, and killed. The following day, law enforcement located and arrested Jacqueline Williams. She had the newborn, whom she had named Elijah. The child survived. The subsequent trial proceeded with physical, testimonial, and circumstantial evidence. Witnesses testified about Williams's fabricated pregnancy and her presence during the incident. A jury deliberated for approximately 2 hours before finding her guilty of murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. On May 11, 1998, Jacqueline Williams was sentenced to death. In 2003, Illinois Governor George Ryan commuted all death sentences in the state. As a result, Williams's sentence was changed to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She remains incarcerated in prison. In recent years, she has filed clemency petitions and expressed partial responsibility, writing, "I am guilty, but not of all of this." However, prosecutors have opposed her appeals. Margaret Ann Allen, State, Florida. Date of execution, unspecified. Margaret Allen had a housekeeper called Wenda Wright. According to reports, Wenda was more than just a helper. She was a friend, a familiar face in Allen's life. However, everything changed when $2,000 allegedly went missing from Allen's purse. According to prosecutors, Allen became convinced that Wright had stolen from her. Determined to force a confession, she took matters into her own hands. Inside her home, Allen brutally assaulted Wright. She beat her, poured chemicals on her face, and ultimately strangled her with a cloth belt. Medical experts would later testify that Wright's body showed signs of extensive trauma and prolonged abuse. Wright was overpowered, held down by Allen's nephew, Quentin Allen. He would later tell the court that he was terrified and complied only out of fear for his own life. Once Wright was dead, Allen, Quentin, and her roommate, James Martin, loaded the body into a car and buried it in a shallow grave off State Road 46. Just 2 days later, police received a tip. Quentin came forward and revealed everything. His confession led investigators straight to the grave, and within 72 hours of the murder, Margaret Allen was under arrest. Quentin Allen took a plea deal, 15 years for second-degree murder. James Martin received 5 years for acting as an accessory. At trial, prosecutors described Margaret Allen as the mastermind, aggressive, controlling, and unrelenting. The defense claimed she was a woman scarred by a life of trauma, damaged by years of abuse, and struggling with mental illness. they further claimed she suffered from brain damage and lacked the mental capacity to form intent. But the jury did not believe it. In 2011, 6 years after the crime, Margaret Allen was sentenced to death. The decision was unanimous. 12 jurors voted in favor of the ultimate penalty. She became only the third woman on Florida's death row at the time. Today, Allen remains incarcerated. Marilyn K. Edge, State, California. Date of execution, unspecified. On September 2013, staff at the Hampton Inn and Suites in Santa Ana, California, found the bodies of 2 children. They were 13-year-old Jalen and 10-year-old Faith Edge. Their mother, 42-year-old Marilyn Edge, had already disappeared. Marilyn and her ex-husband, Mark Edge, had argued over the children for years. They finalized their divorce in 2007, which led to many legal battles across different states. Their son, Jalen, had autism and was often at the center of the conflict. Marilyn claimed his condition made court-ordered visits with Mark harmful. But Mark, a military veteran and contractor, said he only wanted to be part of his children's lives. In early September 2013, a judge in Georgia gave Mark full custody after years of legal delays and false claims. The court ordered Marilyn to return the children by Sunday, September 15th. But she never did. Instead, 3 days before the deadline, she took Jalen and Faith from Arizona to California. She told others they were going on vacation. They visited places like Disneyland and the beach. However, prosecutors later stated that the trip was part of her plan. On the morning of September 14th, Marilyn crashed her car into an electrical box outside a Home Depot in Costa Mesa. When police arrived, they found her trying to take her own life with an electrical cord. Officers rescued her, placed her under suicide watch, and later heard her confession. Her children were already dead in the hotel room. Investigators said she took their lives with poison. Officials didn't reveal the exact substance, but it was enough to charge her with exceptional circumstances: murder by poison and murder of multiple victims. If convicted, Marilyn could face life in prison or the death penalty. During her first court appearance, when the judge asked if she wanted to delay the arraignment, Marilyn answered 3 times, "Only if you promise me the death penalty." Mark Edge, the father, wrote in a painful online message, "I walk away from the evil deeds of one and carry the grief of 3. Marilyn was later sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lolita Barthel, State, Florida. Date of execution, unspecified. On August 18, 1995, Lolita Barthel and 2 associates targeted 64-year-old Richard Mendez, a floral supply salesman. According to later testimony from one of Barthel's co-defendants, the group had previously committed robberies targeting elderly individuals without physical altercations. In this instance, events escalated. The group forced entry into Mendez's home. During the encounter, Mendez reportedly attempted to resist by reaching for a firearm. He was subsequently shot and killed. The specific circumstances of the shooting remain disputed. The prosecution alleged that Barthel was the individual who fired the weapon. A co-defendant testified against her in exchange for a reduced sentence, quoting her as having said, "Don't nobody put their hands on me. I'm going to smoke you." Barthel denied making that statement. She was arrested less than 1 month later while at school in the office of her principal. Barthel was charged with first-degree murder and robbery. Although a juvenile at the time of the offense, she was tried as an adult. On December 19, 1996, she was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At the age of 19, she was transferred to the Jefferson Correctional Institution in Florida. Over time, Barthel has given limited public interviews, maintaining that fear influenced her actions and that she does not recall key moments of her trial and sentencing. As of today, Lolita Barthel remains incarcerated. Her case continues to be referenced in discussions about juvenile justice and sentencing. Some focus on the seriousness of the crime and her adult conviction, while others highlight her age at the time of the offense. Deborah Denise Brown. State, Indiana. Date of execution unspecified. Deborah Brown became a wanted criminal after she met Alton Coleman. Coleman was an experienced predator with a long history of sexual violence, and he quickly took control of Brown's life. Prosecutors described their relationship as a disturbing master-slave dynamic. Together, they became one of the most destructive criminal pairs in American history. For 2 months in 1984, Brown and Coleman went on a violent crime spree. They crossed state lines, committing crimes in southern Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Kentucky, and Ohio. They left behind 8 murder victims, including children and elderly adults, and numerous survivors who were kidnapped, assaulted, or left to die. Most of their victims were African American. Prosecutors said the pair chose them not out of hatred, but because they believed they would draw less attention in black communities. They first gained trust by being kind and familiar. Then they suddenly attacked with brutal and planned violence. Often they stayed with their victims, using charm to lower suspicion. Without warning, they would strike. They became known for using ligatures to strangle their victims. One of the most heartbreaking cases involved 7-year-old Tama Turks. Brown and Coleman approached Tama and her niece while the girls were walking home from a candy store. Tama never made it home. Police captured Brown and Coleman in Evanston, Illinois, on July 20th, 1984. This occurred just 3 days after the FBI added Coleman to its list of the 10 most wanted. After their arrest, the legal system moved quickly. Prosecutors from several states collaborated to ensure that justice was served. In Ohio, a court sentenced Deborah Brown to death for 2 murders. However, in 1991, Governor Richard Celeste changed her sentence to life in prison. He said her low mental ability, her nonviolent past before meeting Coleman, and her complete dependence on him justified the decision. However, she still has a separate death sentence in Indiana. Today, Deborah Denise Brown is in prison at the Ohio Reformatory for Women. In a note to a judge, she once wrote, "I don't give a damn. I had fun out of it." Deborah Brown is still the only woman on Indiana's death row. Lutricia Dancy, State, Florida. Date of execution unspecified. A 51-year-old man was found deceased inside his residence in Miami-Dade County, Florida. The case involved his wife, Lutricia Dancy, and drew attention due to the efforts made to conceal the crime. Neighbors reported not seeing the man for several days, followed by complaints of a strong, unusual odor coming from the home. Authorities were contacted, and upon entry, police discovered the body in an advanced state of decomposition. Investigators determined that the victim had been shot. Subsequent attempts had been made to destroy the body using acid and fire, with the apparent intention of hindering identification and removing evidence. Within 5 days of the discovery, Dancy was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. During pre-trial proceedings, prosecutors did not publicly disclose a detailed motive for the crime. However, the case presented in court suggested a relationship characterized by tension and instability. Dancy did not deny being present in the home, but pleaded not guilty to the murder charge. Her defense focused on intent and mental state, both central issues in the legal proceedings. The trial was held in Miami-Dade County. It included witness testimony, forensic analysis, and argumentation regarding the post-mortem handling of the victim's remains. Prosecutors emphasized the deliberate nature of the concealment efforts. On November 15, 2005, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Lutricia Dancy was sentenced to 45 years in prison. She remains incarcerated within the Florida Department of Corrections. Tiffany Hall, State, Illinois. Date of execution unspecified. Tiffany Hall and Jamela Tuntel were childhood friends. They went to the same alternative schools. Jamela was 23 years old and 7 months pregnant. She often asked Hall to babysit her 3 young children. However, on September 15, 2006, Hall struck Jamela repeatedly and fatally in the head. Prosecutors said she then carried out a calculated act of cutting Jamela's unborn child from her womb. Jamela bled to death in a bathtub. Her body was hidden in a nearby field. Not long after the crime, Hall appeared at a public park claiming she had just delivered a stillborn baby. She also brought the fetus with her. She refused medical attention and gave conflicting accounts of what happened. 3 days after killing Jamela, Hall went to Jamela's partner, the father of her children. She told him Jamela had asked her to come pick up the kids and the car. Believing her, he let them go. Authorities believe Hall took the children back to the same home where she had murdered their mother. In that same bathtub, she drowned all 3 of them. They were 7-year-old Demon, 2-year-old Ivan, and 1-year-old Janella. Later, investigators found their bodies hidden inside the apartment's washer and dryer. A week passed. Then, at a funeral she arranged for the fetus, whom she had named and buried, Hall confessed to her boyfriend. She told him the baby wasn't his. She said she had taken the child. Then she added, "I killed a woman." Alarmed, her boyfriend went straight to the police. Hall was arrested that same day. At her hearings, investigators described her as calm, cooperative, yet emotionally distant. She had documented mental health problems and a low IQ, but doctors declared her competent to stand trial. Facing the possibility of a death sentence, Hall pleaded guilty to all 5 charges: the murders of Jamela and her 3 children and the unlawful killing of the unborn child. On June 9, 2008, she was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. Tiffany Hall remains in prison in Illinois to this day. Dorothy Williams, State, Illinois. Date of execution unspecified. Between 1987 and 1989, Dorothy Williams committed multiple crimes involving elderly victims living alone in senior housing. Her first known homicide occurred on December 5, 1987, when 79-year-old Lonnie Law was found strangled in his apartment. Approximately 1 year later, she was linked to the stabbing of 64-year-old Caesar Zuhl. On July 25, 1989, 97-year-old Mary Harris was killed inside her apartment. According to Williams's later confession, she entered under pretenses, accepted money to run an errand, and then attacked Harris. The motive was robbery, specifically to obtain a stereo for resale. Harris was strangled with her own scarf, and her residence was searched for valuables. Witnesses observed Williams leaving the building with a large box. Fingerprints found at the scene, along with the recovered stereo in her possession, led to her arrest on September 6, 1989. During subsequent interviews, Williams confessed to multiple offenses. She provided varying statements over several days. On April 18, 1991, she was convicted of the murder and robbery of Mary Harris and sentenced to death. She later pleaded guilty to the killings of Law and Zuhl, receiving life sentences. Additional convictions included several robberies, one of which involved a wheelchair-bound victim. Although her attorneys challenged her mental fitness, psychological evaluations concluded she was competent. Evaluators noted she demonstrated manipulative behavior and attempted to evade responsibility by altering her narrative. In 2003, following Governor George Ryan's commutation of all death sentences in Illinois, Williams's sentence was reduced to life imprisonment without parole. She remains incarcerated. LaShawn Ternais, State, California. Date of execution, unspecified. On October 19, 2005, LaShawn Ternais boarded a train in Oakland with her 3 young sons. They were 6-year-old Trayan, 2-year-old Toronto, and 16-month-old Joshua. They arrived in San Francisco, walked through Fisherman's Wharf, stopped for hot dogs, and eventually made their way toward Pier 7. Witnesses later described a quiet woman gently undressing her children by the water. Many assumed she was just changing their clothes, but one after the other, Ternais lifted each child and dropped him into the San Francisco Bay. Later, she told investigators that God had ordered her to send the children to heaven. In her mind, she wasn't killing them. She was carrying out a divine command. Only the body of 2-year-old Toronto was ever found. Trayan and Joshua were lost to the water, their remains never recovered. Afterward, Ternais was seen calmly pushing an empty stroller away from the pier. When officers stopped her, she remained composed. She looked at them and said simply, "They're with their father now." Her arrest triggered an investigation into her past. Ternais had spent years in and out of psychiatric hospitals, suffering from hallucinations, religious delusions, and suicidal ideation. Her family had repeatedly raised the alarm. They begged social services for help and even asked to take custody of the children themselves, warning that Ternais was a danger to herself and her sons. However, their cries for help were ignored. In 2007, a jury found LaShawn Ternais guilty of 3 counts of second-degree murder. But just one day later, Judge Ksenia Tinon ruled that she was legally insane. The court concluded that Ternais could not understand the nature or the wrongfulness of her actions. Instead of prison, Ternais was sent to a state mental hospital where she remains to this day. Her commitment is for life. One psychiatrist who treated her later revealed that Ternais genuinely believed her children were in heaven, happy, safe, and alive. She told him she planned to join them and even asked him to deliver a letter to God by plane. Andrea Hicks Jackson, State, Florida. Date of execution, unspecified. On May 16, 1983, Andrea Hicks Jackson was involved in the fatal shooting of 29-year-old officer Gary Bevel in Jacksonville, Florida. Bevel had been dispatched to arrest Jackson for filing a false police report regarding her vehicle. During the attempted arrest near 26th Street and Boulevard, Jackson resisted. A struggle ensued, during which Jackson drew a firearm and discharged 6 rounds, fatally wounding Officer Bevel. Jackson was arrested shortly after the incident and charged with first-degree murder. In 1984, she was convicted and sentenced to death. Over the next 16 years, the Florida Supreme Court overturned her sentence 4 times. Each overturn was based on procedural issues, such as inadmissible testimony, improper jury instructions, and her absence from a hearing. Her conviction was upheld throughout. In June 2000, Judge Donald Moran, who had previously issued death sentence in her case, changed Jackson's sentence to life imprisonment. He cited the repeated rulings from the state's high court and emphasized the need for a final resolution. Although he ordered the sentence to be without parole, the laws applicable at the time of the crime allowed for parole eligibility beginning in 2009. Andrea Hicks Jackson remains incarcerated. Her case has continued to receive attention due to its extended legal history and its impact on local law enforcement. Malika Griffin, State, Colorado. Date of execution, unspecified. In early 1999, Malika Tamu Griffin moved into a rented room in Denver, Colorado. Her neighbors were a young couple, 25-year-old Jason Horsley, a carpenter, and his girlfriend. Every evening, Jason would unload his tools from his truck in front of the house, but later events would reveal that Griffin had reservations about that. On May 18, 1999, Griffin confronted Jason about his tools being left on the sidewalk. The exchange quickly turned into a heated argument. Griffin returned to her apartment, grabbed a 9mm handgun equipped with a laser sight, and shot Jason in the back. He died instantly. Griffin fled. She went to a friend's home, carjacked her vehicle at gunpoint, and vanished. Days later, that exact vehicle was found abandoned in Iowa City. Inside her apartment, investigators found assault rifles and grenades. There were manuals on bomb making, terrorism, and guerrilla tactics. Her journals revealed deep-seated hatred, violent fantasies, and writings that warned of an impending race war. Despite being featured on America's Most Wanted several times, Griffin managed to stay hidden. For 6 years, there were no credible leads until 2005. That year, Griffin was discovered living under the alias Lake Griffin in El Cajon, California. She worked quietly at a biotech company, held side jobs at fast food restaurants and thrift shops, and blended into the background. After a rerun of her case aired nationally, someone recognized her. A tip led authorities to her door. When the FBI arrived, she didn't fight. She confirmed her real identity and was extradited to Colorado to stand trial. In court, Griffin denied killing Jason. She claimed the writings found in her apartment were part of a fictional play. She testified that the shooting had been accidental or an act of self-defense triggered by fear. Her escape, the weapon used, and her writings painted a picture of premeditation and intent. The jury didn't believe her version of events. On March 5, 2006, Malika Tamu Griffin was found guilty of first-degree murder. The court sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Today, she is serving her sentence at La Vista Correctional Facility in Pueblo, Colorado. Marie Dean Arrington, State, Florida. Date of execution, unspecified. Marie Dean Arrington's criminal record began in 1964 when she shot and killed her husband during a domestic dispute. She was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 20 years in prison. While out on appeal, she developed a fixation on the public defender involved in her children's criminal cases. Both of her children had been convicted of serious offenses and sentenced to prison. Although the public defender was not responsible for the outcome, Arrington placed the blame on him. Unable to reach him directly, she targeted someone connected to him. On April 22, 1968, Vivian Ritter, a 37-year-old secretary in the public defender's office, disappeared. Witnesses placed Arrington at the office that morning and later observed her and Ritter traveling together in Ritter's car. That same day, gunshots were reported near an orange grove in the Leesburg area. 5 days later, Ritter's body was found in a remote field. An investigation linked the murder to a .22 caliber revolver that Arrington had previously borrowed from her landlord. A search of her residence uncovered Ritter's personal belongings and a letter threatening violence if certain inmates were not released. Handwriting analysis and witness statements identified Arrington as the author. She was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. In 1969, Arrington escaped from the Florida Correctional Institution while awaiting execution. She exited through a screened window while wearing pajamas. Her escape led to a nationwide manhunt, and she was added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list, becoming one of the few women ever featured on it. Arrington remained at large for nearly 3 years. In 1971, she was located in New Orleans, living under an alias. She was arrested without incident and later received an additional 10-year sentence for the escape. In 1972, after the Florida Supreme Court invalidated the state's death penalty statute, her sentence was commuted to life in prison. Marie Dean Arrington remains incarcerated. Her case is noted for its involvement with capital punishment, a major prison escape, and one of the rare instances of a woman appearing on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. If you enjoy the way we create videos and would like us to bring more cases like this to light, Please hit the like button and subscribe for more in-depth dives.